This talk is probably best if you take it as a fairy tale, and because it's a lot of second-hand knowledge, and second-hand knowledge is always best taken as a fairy tale. We'll try to get at some of the principles. We will be reviewing a lot of Rosicrucian philosophy, but we are trying to get at definite, specific principles that we can use. Also, we lost the picture overnight, but the picture that we drew of the desire world yesterday via the astrological mandala, keep that in your mind because it will still apply. It's right beneath the surface, everything we're going to talk about today. The talk today is called Forgiveness, and we're in that part of the whole series of talks where we're trying to unfold a soft heart. The whole series of talks by request of the summer school committee is about the Rosicrucian motto, a sane mind, a soft heart, and a sound body. And so this is part 2 of trying to get to a soft heart in our living. When I was young and studying the Rosicrucian philosophy, I thought it was curious how Max always used to like to go back to the same old adages or maxims or saws. He would go back to them again and again. They were very sage statements, and they were very pithy in their content, but I couldn't figure out why he kept going back again and again. I knew that he liked to stress the value of repetition, but there seemed to be something more beyond that. And in the last few years, what I've noticed in myself is that I was developing my own set of adages and maxims and saws that I would repeat again and again. And it's almost as if when you reach a certain stage of life, you've had enough experience. And when you have enough experience, you come to realize the fundamental principles. Some things are true, and you realize that some things stated just so well that you keep going back to them again and again. They're usually stated with brevity, and so everybody seems to, after a certain age, have their own set of adages and maxims and saws. And they eliminate a lot of philosophical paraphernalia. It was not too long ago that I was talking to a friend about this, and this friend was having a difficult time coping with a tight life condition. And as the conversation progressed, I told him that whenever I found myself in a tight corner and couldn't cut what was going on, I usually resorted to my coping saw. But I have to have at least one pun every few days. But I really am fond of maxims like that. One of my favorites is from the Bible, and it goes something like, "And the wise shall be captured in their folly." But there is one that is a restatement of the Hermetic axiom, as above, so below. What has gone before in heaven will follow after on earth. Know this and rejoice. Well, corollary to that is a statement that I love very much, and it's really simple. Everything is in everything. The whole universe is in our body. The whole universe is in our eye. The whole universe is in our spine. So everything is in everything. Several days ago, we mentioned the essence of this maxim when we were talking about the relationship of the desire body to the physical body. The desire body is how we relate to the world of feeling, which is a different world from the physical world. One can live in a romance of feeling and have an emotional life that is completely separate from the physical world. The desire body, by function, is our vehicle of motivation. It is the desire body that gets our physical body to move. If we didn't utilize the desire body and its motivation, we would continue to be plants. We'd be stuck in one place. We'd be like vegetables. We said several days ago, when we said everything is in everything, we said that the expression of the desire body in the physical body was found in the muscles, because it is the muscles that give us our kinetic ability, the ability to do things, carry things out. One clairvoyant even goes so far as to say that if you make a muscle, and if you listen to the muscle and you're sensitive enough, you can hear, some people call the desire world the astral world because the starry influences come through it. It goes back to the days of Paracelsus, who originated a lot of terms that still carry into our times. This clairvoyant claims that if you make a muscle and listen to it when it's flexed, that you can actually hear the music of the spheres as it rings in the ringing of a muscle. That may be so, but if you're that sensitive that you can hear that, you don't even need a muscle. You can go straight to the desire world and pick things up there. The Rosicrucian Cosmoconception tells us that the primary seat of the desire body is in the liver, that the seed atom of the desire body is in the liver, and the great vortex of the desire body that wells out the desire body into the desire material out into the desire body is located in physically the area where the liver is located. We have confirmation from this from a lot of folk clairvoyance. In a number of societies where folk clairvoyance is still quite prevalent, people will say, "I love you from the bottom of my liver." It's true. There are a number of places on the world where they say that. Now, clearly, the person who says that is trying to tell you that they have a strong feeling for you. Of course, if I said that, you'd know where I was coming from. Yes. With all joking aside, this even carries, everything is in everything, and it carries right into the physical body. The liver is where all the proteins are synthesized in the body. And the proteins are the components of the muscles. So even in the physical body, the relationships carry all the way through. The desire body is the reflective projection of the human spirit, the self. We said yesterday that the Father is like a storage battery, like a car battery. Invisible power lies in that black box. If we hook up a light bulb to the terminals, it's like the life spirit. The light just radiates out, pure, clear, white light. But that if we run that white light through a prism, it breaks into 7 rays. And the white light has all of the color within it. And the human spirit, the third part of the Trinity in the individual, is colorful. We say that a person who is individuated is a very highly colorful person. This reflects and carries into the desire body, where the expression of truth as emotion is experienced in the same way that we experience color. That if one is perceiving with the vortex of the desire body, if one is perceiving feelings with an organ of feeling, different feelings have the character that one experiences when one looks at a color. in the human spirit is a self, or as Max Heindel calls it, a spiritual ego, and it is born as an idea. So this is pretty much agreed to by all mystery schools, that the selfhood that we prize so much is basically just an idea. I don't like to use the word just because it's a divinely conceived idea, and it is an eternal idea. In the same way that the region of ideational thought, or of abstract thought, is reflectively projected into the desire world, the selfhood is also projected into the desire world in a very funny kind of way. We have something that is like a lower self, or a lower nature, some call it, or some call it a personal ego. And it's a second self. It's a pseudo-self. In fact, most of the time when we think about ourselves, we're thinking in terms of that personal ego, that lower self. It's located, according to the Rosicrucian philosophy, in the upper region of the desire body, the stratified desire body, and it was developed there in the times called Lemuria. Now you can see we've gotten ourselves into a lot of technical lingo, a lot of jargon, and it's very easy to read words and understand the words and think that we know them, and it's easy to be carried along by an author. And when the author writes with conviction, or somebody speaks with conviction, there's a feeling of truth that goes with that may or may not be a valid feeling of truth. So what I think we ought to do is review the second-hand story of how the second self is developed, how are the lower natures developed, and what it means with regard to developing a soft heart. Usually, the more jargon that is slung around, the more it is an indication that the speaker doesn't know what he's talking about. You can almost take it as a law that the more patois, the more baloney. See, I snuck a French word in for you. All right, let's try to look at it in a little bit simpler language, or at least let's restate it again in our own words. The Rosicrucian philosophy teaches that we belong to an evolutionary creation. It's a creation in that it is a divine dream that is being worked out. It's evolutionary in that its form is very progressive, very orderly, and very designed to bring about certain effects. One of the evolutionary parts of the creation is repetition. We are brought to many different experiences repeatedly, and each time from a different point of view, so that a universal spiritual truth is brought to us by a repetition, and a repetition that allows us to experience something over again and again and again, and so the full flavor of the Spirit can be unfolded and enriched by many kinds of experiences. Now, the Rosicrucian philosophy claims that there have been 3 periods preceding the period in which we're living. That is, at one time the universe was no more dense than a thought. This is called the Saturn period. At that time, according to the Rosicrucian philosophy, we were mineral-like. So we were stones that were made out of thought. After a long rest period, the universe came out again. Now, mind you, we're speaking only from our point of view, and it was no more dense than an emotion. And at that time, we were plant-like. And we developed the ability to have sentient life. We were plant-like beings. And then the universe withdrew and went to sleep again, and progressively it came out further, and it was no more dense than what science would call an electromagnetic field, which we would call the ethers. At that time, we were animal-like. And we were animal-like in that we developed the ability to have a separate moving organism. And we developed the ability to feel and to be motivated. We are now in the earth period where we come into our own as human beings. And in the human condition, we pass from being creatures that are totally the product of the gods, to the point where we awaken to our divinity. And when we awaken to our divinity, we evict all of the influences of the gods. We throw them out. We throw them out creatively. Everything is then our creation, and we come into our own as creators. So the human condition is, we're sort of, biologically, we belong more to the animal kingdom. Spiritually, we belong to the gods, at least in our highest conceptions, and we sort of waver back and forth until we become strong enough that we can follow the spiritual path altogether and become creative beings. Now, in the earth period, we recapitulate everything that we did before. We recapitulate many times over. And the recapitulation of the mineral-like state is called the Polarian epoch. And the plant-like state is called the Hyperborean epoch. And the recapitulation of the animal-like state was in the Lemurian epoch. And that's what we want to get at. Now, it's one of the idiosyncrasies of the cosmos that everything proceeds from spirit to matter. And it's just like what we talked about last week in the extrovertive stream of crystallization. Everything comes from deep within and it works its way out. Our bodies are excrement. They are excreted from the spirit. And it's a long process of doing this. Now, because everything goes from within out, when we want to develop a new faculty, it isn't like building a house where we add another wing on or we add another room. We can't do that. We have to go all the way back to the beginning and start all over again. We see this in evolution, in the physical world, even in physical sense. Both the animal kingdom goes all the way back to a single cell, and it comes forward to the very complex things like the mammals. The same thing is true with the plant kingdom, which goes all the way back to a euglena or something like that. That's, I think, one of the first plant-like creatures that, and then evolves into the trees that we see around us. The Rosicrucian philosophy, the seers claim that going way back into our history, that we did the same thing, that we were single-cell human beings. So we recapitulate the human condition over again and again in different ways. And in the Lemurian epoch of this time period that we're in, which is called the revolution of time, at that time we were recapitulating an animal-like condition. That is, we were relearning feeling. But we were relearning feeling in such a way as to accommodate within the feeling the ability to think. Because the mind is what links us to the spirit, to the divine, godlike being that we are in spirit. So in order for the spirit to enter into all of its vehicles, it required the mind to be able to focus through the desire and emotional nature, to be able to focus through the etheric living nature, and to actually come right into the physical world at all, altogether. So this required that kind of recapitulation. At that time, which is called Lemuria, our bodies weren't even anything like we are now. We were recapitulating a body that was much more similar to probably what is called a lemur. It's described by clairvoyants as being dog-like in shape. And our consciousness, our mental consciousness was very vague. Our spiritual consciousness was very vague. And we were beginning to bring the waking self-consciousness, the I am awareness, into all of our vehicles. We had to do that to wake up so that we could gain the full experience of the world, and that we could then, everything that we experienced, we could bring through the train of consciousness back to the spirit, and the spirit could gain from learning what we learn here by experience. We were more in the Lemurian times. This is a fairy tale now, mind you. In the Lemurian times, we were more animal-like than human-like. Our desires were stronger than our minds. We had a very, very vague spiritual self-consciousness and a very vague mental consciousness. So we learned moral experiences by the principles that we were talking about yesterday. Self-assertion and its effects, and self-sacrifice and its effects. The effects of self-assertion being repulsion, so that we could separate, repel things, and learn one thing at a time through identification. Through self-sacrifice and the giving out of love, we attracted things to us so that we could unify. At this time, in Lemuria, we were capable of making decisions. Even though we were not full-fledged in our mental capacity, we're still not yet. And even though we were not intuitively aware enough to really make good decisions, we made decisions. But to a large extent, we were guided by the gods. The gods led us everywhere. One of the decisions we made, with a little bit of help from beings that are called Lucifers, one of the decisions we made was to take the use of the creative energy that is available to us into our own hands. This is the life energy, the same thing that goes into artistic creation or technical creation, and that goes into the creation of physical bodies. It is the sexual energy. Previous to this time, we were led by the angels to reproduce at times that were harmonious with the cosmos. When we took it into our own hands, it was a great power, and we took it into our own hands in several ways, both in using the procreative function and in using it magically. When we took it into our own hands, we chose experience over insight. We chose repulsion by taking pleasure to ourselves over sacrifice and drawing things to us by giving love. Over a long course of history, by understanding the consequences of different types of feelings, we produced a stratification in our desire nature, so that the attractive desires were found more on one side of the realm of feeling, and the repulsive desires more on the other side of the feeling, region of feeling. It's something like what happens in our etheric bodies. We learn that by practicing certain exercises, we can separate the soul ethers from the biological ethers. We can leave the biological ethers behind to take care of the physical body, and we can put our attention into the soul ethers and leave the physical body altogether. So it's not quite like cream rising to the top of milk, the stratification of the desire body, but it's not quite a completely controlled separation process either, where you do the separation with full waking consciousness. It was a result of evolutionary experience. Now, we said that we were guided all along by the gods, primarily by angels and other groups that guided us. And before we took creativity in our own hands, because you understand that once you take the power of creation into your own hands, you're declaring you are a god. And when you declare that, that is respected by the cosmos. So previously, the angels and other beings used to be able to lead us around willy-nilly, just the same way that they lead animals around. And they lead animals around with great wisdom. You know, like if you see a school of fish and you throw a stone in the water, those fish scatter, but they never run into each other. Or if you walk along and you scare up a flock of birds, the birds take off and they never run into each other. Never. They're guided. There's an overshadowing spiritual consciousness that is guiding them. And it takes care of every need that the animal has. When we started to become self-conscious and we began to declare ourselves as gods, this left us in a really tough position. The position was that the gods could no longer make all of our decisions for us. But the spiritual consciousness was so dim yet, our self-consciousness was probably less than our current dogs have. Our pets have more self-consciousness than we had at that time. It was very vague. We didn't even know each other. The Bible tells us that the only time we really did know the presence of somebody outside of us was in the sexual act, because that was the only time that there was an extreme enough feeling to feel somebody outside. Now it's ironic that we're going the other direction, and sometimes the only time that some people know that there's somebody inside is in the sexual act. It's a very unusual kind of activity. So we arrogated the power of self-control, or the control of our lives, away from the hierarchies that guided us. And we abrogated it to ourselves. We said, hands off. However, they couldn't leave us feeble-minded, because we couldn't really take care of ourselves. So what was done is all of the people who had developed enough so that they could realize the difference between the morality of attractiveness versus the morality of repulsiveness. The morality of repulsiveness, we took that on with great passion, and we drove ourselves right down into the material world so deep that we disrupted a fundamental balance. The fundamental balance is the balance between experience and insight. If that balance were perfect, if we were right on the fulcrum of the balance, we would need only one time to learn a lesson. We would have an experience and we would intuitively know the meaning of it. But as it is, we chose experience so much that we almost forget about insight. and we lose insight, and we make the same dumb mistakes over again and again and again. It's terrible. We're aware, spiritually, we're aware that there are lessons that we can learn about the whole world, and there are moral lessons that we can learn about life, and we don't do it because, something in us drives us into desire. And that which drives us into desire is this lower nature. What happened was that the hierarchies, as they were withdrawing from us, precipitated or formulated in our desire nature a second self. And this second self was meant to be a personal instinct. It was meant to watch, so that we would watch over ourselves, because the group spirit would no longer be doing it for us. And it did that just wonderfully. The desire body formed a union or a coalition. Anytime you hear the word coalition, look for trouble. It formed a coalition with the mind, and it developed into a pretty strong entity. And it knew it had a good thing going for itself. And it doesn't want to give up that position. So that it takes care of us very, very well. But it uses only cunning. It cannot do creative thinking because it's not the divine part of us. There's a wonderful story called The Strange Story by Edward Bulwer Lytton. He wrote two great novels, one of which is called Zanoni, which is the story of adepts, which is absolutely wonderful. The other is called The Strange Story, and there's a character in A Strange Story that is called Margrave. And it describes an individual who has, the personality has become so strong that the spirit can do nothing with it. And it describes the spirit pulling away, and then you have this monstrosity that has a mind that is very bright and very witty, and a desire nature that can be very charming, but it can't create for itself. And it lives for thousands of years by stealing energy from other people and using other people for its experience. It's the best description that I have ever seen of the spirit withdrawing from the personality because it can no longer control the personality. To some extent, until the spirit draws into the physical, we're all like that. We're creatures of cunning. We can be charming and we can be sweet, but somehow underneath it we're vipers. It's a part of ourselves that we don't feel really good about it.
Who is the writer of this strange story?
Edward Bulwer, Buwler hyphen Lytton.
Like that. Daisy talks about him a lot.
Yeah.
Is it kind of like a vampire within?
No.
Symbolically speaking.
No. And he has a little science fiction story called Vril, The Coming Race. All of the books are in print yet. He was a 18th century English writer.
Could we order them through your bookstore?
Probably not. There is a place in Washington called Health Research, and you can buy it from Health Research. They're much better about delivering than I am. It might take you.
Washington, D.C.?
Yes. No, Washington State. I'll try to. Do you have access to the internet? They're on the internet. The place is called Health Research. They're a reprint. A reprint company. There are two very excellent reprint companies. One is Health Research, and the other is called Kessinger. All right. Where are we? All right. So what happened is we developed a very strong personality, and we drove ourselves deeper and deeper into matter. And the greatest prize for the lower self is the physical body. It just loves the physical body because that's our most developed tool, and it's the place of our greatest awakeness. In the background, the spirit, our real, true nature, is still there. In fact, we're so much in illusion that we think that our ego consciousness, our lower ego consciousness with a small e, is the real self. Even so much that you find people who do great creative work, which comes from the spirit, they don't even realize that it's themselves. Like Ludwig Beethoven says, he says there's always something in every great creation that goes beyond the creator. He doesn't know that that is the real creator, that is his real nature. And if he could be in touch with that, it works in a different way. Gradually, as we become more and more spiritually self-conscious, we recognize that the spirit, which is our real being, incubates. Everything that is spiritual is born whole. And like a talk like for myself, I can feel in my spiritual being, I can feel when a thought is beginning to incubate into a whole and become a reality. And when it's whole, and you're really in touch, and you really serve the spirit, you can sit down and you can just write it right straight out, as though you were taking dictation, and you're not taking it from somebody outside of yourself. Because if you're in touch with the spiritual process, you can feel it incubate in your whole being. All right. So at any rate, this lower self is focused through the desire world. And in its prize in the physical body, it has its greatest advantage in the muscles. For example, even though I, the spirit, love looking at the beauty of people around me, the desire nature has control of the voluntary muscles. And it wants me to ogle and to lust after people. It's really a struggle all the time. And that is what it is meant to be. What serves one function at one time, what used to be gill sacs when we were in Atlantean times, when we used to breathe through gill sacs, that is now our eustachian tubes. That keeps a back pressure on our ears. You can follow it right in embryology. You can follow a change from a gill sac right into the eustachian tubes. And so what serves one function at one time in evolution served another function at another time in evolution. The lower self at one time was meant to be our protector. Now it has a different function. Its function is to provide resistance. Max Heindel used to say, it is when we have to struggle that we develop moral muscle, that we develop character in struggling. Everything in the desire body works by struggle. Isometric exercises. You know that if you walk, it's not just a matter of using some muscles to walk, to put your leg forward. When you put your leg forward, the muscles that would hold it back have to relax at the same time that the muscles that pull it forward are taking hold. And then when your leg goes the other way as you're walking, the process is reversed. There are miracles that are happening in our body all the time. It's a constant matter of one muscle working against another to even just be able to walk down the street. And so there's always this principle of struggle. It's one thing against another. I had one of my most shocking experiences about the desire body and the muscles when I lived here. I lived here from 1964 to 1967. And I used to take weekends off and go to places. I used to hang around with the Folknicks down in Mission Beach. And once in a while I'd go up to L.A. And I went up to Santa Monica Beach. And Santa Monica Beach, in those days, I don't know if it still is or not, used to be called Muscle Beach. Because that's where all the so-called bodybuilders went. And I was shocked. In fact, I was repulsed by what I saw. I saw these great, big, huge bodies, bulky, but the eyes were like dead. It's like there was no life in them. It was, I don't mean to say that all muscle builders are like that, but that's what I saw there. And many of them had made such massive muscles that the muscles were hard and bulky so that they were no longer flexible. They were muscle bound. They were hardened. They had no room left in their musculature for motion. That's really extreme. That's where we're trying to get at. We're trying to look at hardness. From cover to cover, the Bible warns against the dangers of a hard heart. And so we're trying to get to softness. As near as I can tell, hardness, whether it's psychological hardness or whether it's physical hardness, is a consequence of indulgence. Anytime we indulge ourselves in anything, we harden ourselves. It doesn't have to be an indulgence in something base or something lower. We can even indulge ourselves in kindness. And if we indulge ourselves in kindness and we take great pleasure in how we did that for somebody, we're hardening our nature. We have to remember that if the Rosicrucian cosmoconception is true, the lower nature is focused in the higher desires. And I think we find this when we find that there's no person more dangerous than a self-righteous fanatic who thinks they are doing good. There are stories of Nazis that used to go at church and they would sing old hymns and they would cry and the tears would stream down their cheeks, and the next day they would go and fry Jews. It's that kind of a thing. The danger is perhaps more in self-righteousness than it is in just base, more carnal indulgences. Judas was the one that used to love to feed the poor. That kind of thing. I've had a number of friends that were Rosicrucian students and heroin addicts. And they used to tell me stories of people who would get so hardened, not even when they were out with the drugs, that somebody would keel over and die next to them, and it wouldn't make any difference to them. They were hardened. They were insensitive. As far as I can tell, this is personal opinion, there are only 3 agencies for softening hardness. One is a direct experience of the life spirit. One cannot experience the Christ consciousness and remain hard. A second agency is a cleansing and purification and neutralization of hard desires by a retrospection, either an afterlife retrospection or a voluntary retrospection. But the third and most universal agency for softening hardness is pain. Most often, we don't take advantage of the post-mortem retrospection, and we come back and we do the same thing all over again until we feel pain. Pain doesn't let us get away with anything. It's very exacting. Or as Max used to say, The mills of God grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. But there's often a long time between cause and consequence. And when you're into desire, you're not necessarily into a broad, expansive span of attention, is the word I'm trying to get to. So what happens is we haven't really turned the corner yet. Christ has turned the corner for us and is drawing us up in the grand ascension out of the physical world, and that by aspiring to that being and that life, we can redeem ourselves from what is called the fall. And there is hope in aspiring to the Christ experience that we can learn things in a better way than we do now. It's humiliating. It's really humiliating to know what we know and to have to experience pain in order to learn our lesson. It seems like we just persist and persist and persist until we experience the pain, and it's humiliating to our pride, which may be all right. One of the things about pain that makes it inefficient is that sometimes it has the opposite effect. For someone who is an extreme sensualist, pain is as acute an experience as pleasure is. And someone who's trying to revel in acute experience will choose pain over pleasure. And people will sometimes use pain the same way we use pain to drive us to have a stronger prayer so we can reach deeper into the spiritual worlds, knowing that somebody is suffering. That pain drives an awfully strong prayer for the good. Some people use pain to set themselves against becoming softened. And they use pain to harden themselves even more. Now, the interesting thing about pain is that it is experienced not in the physical body, but in the desire body. So it has the neutralizing effect when pleasure has been carried all the way to the extreme of pain. It has the neutralizing effect in the desire body where the original indulgent desire form was created in the first place. So this begins to throw some light on the second agency for softening. And that agency for softening is the retrospective technique. Whether it happens after death or whether it is a volitional exercise, there are many beneficial effects to retrospection. We're talking about reviewing the images of our life and refeeling them and neutralizing them and drawing the spiritual essence out of our experience as food for the spirit so that it is stronger and that it can come in and take over and have a more full existence. It's not just getting rid of hang-ups. That's one of the benefits. It's not just getting rid of hang-ups. It is completing the essence of experience. When we die, according to the seers, or even if we drown or come near to drowning or fall from a high place or have a bad drug trip or something like that, we see our lives backwards. I worked with a man that almost drowned as a child, and he was a sensitive all the rest of his life, and he couldn't believe how clear the pictures were, how everything, every little detail was there when he saw that. When we retrospect, we do the same thing by volition, but there are some differences. When we die, the archetype, the creative thought of our life, and the creative thought for all of our bodies has run out. And so everything is unwinding. Everything is disintegrating. And it's a natural thing that as things unwind and disintegrate, they reverse themselves. And we see things in a reverse order. Usually, the most repulsive, the most self-assertive desires, because they have repulsion as part of them, and as we saw yesterday, one of the functions of repulsion is to break up desire forms. They usually die first in what is called the purgatory, and then the higher desires are dissolved retrospectively in what is called first heaven. There are some variances to this, usually more intense desires and strongly reinforced desires take longer, but that's roughly the course of things. I don't think it's wise to think of the spiritual worlds like this world, where there are partitions. There's a clean and distinct partition that you can go from one part of the desire world to another the same way that you walk from one room to another. Usually things, because everything in the spiritual worlds is fluidic, it's like our emotions. One resolves into another, and it's a gradual change of mood, and it is a gradual change of consciousness. The perspective is reversed in the desire world because at the same time that things are unwinding, we return to the more divine perspective. We see things from the whole universe, from the extents of the universe, rather than seeing things from this condensed, concentrated little body that we're in now. And as a result, we're grandstand quarterbacks. We're like watching television. We're on the outside, and we can be really sophisticated observers because we can see very objectively what took place. And as a result, we see consequences rather than the causes. When we're desiring something, we are the causal agents, and we see our desires as things we want to do. We don't think about the consequences of other people. When we're spread out to the universe, it's like sitting in a big football stadium, and you can see that guy missed his block, and you can see that it's you that did it, and that's the way we look at it. The images that are in the etheric body flow freely. However, when we're doing a voluntary retrospection, the archetype is not broken down. And we have to consciously cause the images to unspin from the reflecting ether. We have to see, if we want to see the images of what exactly happened, we have to go against the tide of things. It means that retrospection is a very hard exercise, because as soon as we put ourselves in the higher ethers, bam, we fall asleep. Going backwards takes us right out of our body. If you go on a merry-go-round, you go one direction, it makes you dizzy, and you go the other direction, it does not make you dizzy quite so easily. If you look at things forward, it grinds you into the world. If you look at things in reverse order, it takes you out of the world. Moreover, when we're in our bodies, the desire nature, the lower self working in the desire nature, wants to continue to have its power. And when we retrospect consciously, we're fighting psychological resistance. We don't want to admit to ourselves that we did that. Like, I'm going to have to look at myself. Did I make a show of myself today? Or did I just try to communicate clearly and straightforward as I should? These are things that we don't often, like we say, I was just doing that for the sake of the class. It is not, that's not the case. So, the retrospective exercise has the ability of softening us, but we're going against the grain because we're still in our body. The best would be if we could be like an initiate and leave our body, and then we would have the universal consciousness, and we could retrospect with that perspective, which would be a wonderful perspective. It's very much like the statement in the Bible where it says, unto whom is given, I will give more. Once you get to that level, it's a lot, we have many more tools. The thing of it is, if we look at an image, whether it is in between lives, but especially when we're doing a daily retrospection, if we assent to the truth, that's a very big thing. Anytime we assent to the truth, we are bringing in forgiveness. Christ said, I am the truth, meaning to say, the light of truth, when we understand an idea is true, that light is the Christ light. And any time with regard to our life that we objectively assent to the nature of truth in our lives, we are bringing in a forgiveness. This is why, in some respects, retrospection is called the forgiveness of sins. Now, if we look in Luke's Gospel, we're using Luke's Gospel as related to the desire world in the same way we use Matthew to relate to the physical and Mark to relate to the vital body. If we look at Luke's Gospel, we'd expect to find all sorts of things of forgiveness. And they are there. More of the healings are done by thy sins are forgiven in Luke's Gospel than in either Matthew or Mark, or John's for that matter. There are more non-synoptic parables in Luke's Gospels that have to do with forgiveness. The most classic being, who is forgiven most, loves most. And the inverse, who loves most, is forgiven most. So you find all of those things. There's the parable of the man who's in trouble with his boss, the steward, and he forgives everybody else. That's a Luke parable. That's not in the others. And most clearly in Luke's Gospel, for the first time, the forgiveness of Mary Magdalene. And then, as we said yesterday, the last words of Christ were not consummatum est in Luke's Gospel. It was, Father, forgive them. So that statement was the neutralization of the sin of the world. It was in forgiveness. Because the life spirit, the truth of the life spirit, makes everything new. It's a whole new ball game. It's new every moment with that viewpoint. We haven't said anything about the heart yet, and we have 2 minutes to go. In the physical body, going by everything is everything, the life spirit has its primary seat in the pituitary body. The pituitary gland, or the pituitary body, is the endocrine gland that is in charge of all the other endocrine glands. The etheric body, of which the endocrines are a crystallization. They're not subject to most of the other stimuli in the body. They're not subject to nervous stimuli, for example. They only communicate with each other through the etheric bloodstream. The pituitary body controls all of the others. And that's what you would expect with the life spirit having its primary seat in the etheric body and in the pituitary body. The secondary seat of the life spirit is the heart. And the heart, as we know from the Rosicrucian Cosmo concept, is a voluntary muscle, or it's becoming a voluntary muscle. It is both longitudinal and it has some cross striations. And the idea is that every time we do something for the Christ's sake, every time we do something altruistically, when we do things from the goodness of our heart is changed so that it becomes a more voluntary muscle, and that becoming voluntary, it controls the circulation. And controlling the circulation, it can direct where the blood goes, especially the areas of the brain where the blood goes. So the heart is a voluntary muscle, and every time we do something with the goodness of our heart, we're strengthening the volitional quality. The heart is also a spiral muscle. If you've ever seen a heart beating, it's like a fist forming. It's a spiral. It goes in and out and in. It forms like that again and again. If you've ever seen the heart work, it's not a simple thing at all. It is strenuous. I do a lot of gardening, and my garden is probably in wonderful shape right now, and I'm 2,400 miles away from it. I got all these great greens. But in my backyard, going up and down all of the backyards of my neighborhood, there's a wren. And that wren will sing most of the day. And I don't know if you've ever seen a wren sing. The wren puts all of its body into a shiver of song. It's an all-out effort. And it does it hour after hour after hour. That is what the heart is like. And that is why in Luke's gospel, more than any other gospel, it is an all-out gospel. You know, like you have to sell everything you have, and he who saves his life will lose it. And it's filled with all-out statements. You know, we're told to give, and we're told to give everything. The experience of Christ, if we follow Christ, it's not just giving up our money. It's giving up everything, even ourself. In order to experience the life spirit as the life spirit, we have to give up focus in the physical world, in the desire world, all the impressions. We can't even have an impressive consciousness. We can't even have the consciousness of ideas or the concept of self. Everything has to be Christ-oriented. And when we give all of our attention projected into the Christ, we get it all back. We get it all back in a most wonderful way, more than we can believe. But the more that we give the world, give up the world and leave it behind us, and give it with everything we've got in our consciousness to be at one with the Word, to be at one with Christ, is the only way we can do it. It takes a very strong spiritual psychology to have the experience of Christ. And that is what it is all about. When that occurs, we then have a soft heart. When we have that, it's almost impossible to sin, because we live in harmony, we live in love. Everything we do is give. We don't need to. Even if we let people do things for us, we do it in a giving way. And that is why, that is what developing a soft heart is about in St. Luke's Gospel. Let's just end right there. Let's have a double assignment this time. The assignment this time is by tomorrow, when we begin to talk about having a sane mind, we will have read all of St. John's Gospel. I used to read it once a day. 20 years ago, I was nearly dead from cancer. And I laid in bed every day going through this enormous alternative therapy, which kept me quite busy. And all I cared to do was once a day read St. John's Gospel. It was a transforming experience. You get to know parts of it almost by heart. So that's, see, I did mine in the past. I don't have to do it by tomorrow. The other assignment is something that you can only do by yourself. And that is, you can't do it in a crowd. At least once, to say the Rosicrucian prayer with full heart. It may take hours to find yourself in a place where you can give yourself with full heart to it. For now, we'll just say it as we normally say it. O God, increase our love for Thee, so that we may serve Thee better from day to day. Let the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in Thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer.
Thank you.
Yeah.